The distress signal had been looping for nearly 3 standard cycles before anyone dared approach Korthos-9. It was a barren, isolated planet in the far reaches of the Epsilon Expanse, a place known for its brutal storms and ghostly silence. No one lived here. No one was meant to. And yet the signal pulsed, a steady, mechanical heartbeat against the void. We were the closest survey team, dispatched under orders to investigate, and if possible, recover any survivors. Deep space salvage was always a grim business, but something about this felt wrong even before we arrived. There were no nearby colonies, no record of any vessel passing through in the last 50 cycles. The beacon's frequency was ancient, using an encoding system that hadn't been in circulation for centuries. When we finally broke through Korthos-9's thick atmosphere, the ship came into view. It wasn't adrift in orbit as I'd expected. No, it was resting, half buried in the ice, its massive hull punctured and mangled as if something had forced it down rather than letting it crash naturally. From the cockpit, I could see the vessel's name, barely legible under layers of frost. Horrifying. No registry matched it. No historical record. It was as if the Horrifying had never existed. Our ship, the Argos, circled cautiously before we touched down nearby. A 6-man team suited up, myself included, and we stepped into the brutal winds. The ice cracked underfoot, groaning like something alive. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to leave. But curiosity, or maybe duty, pushed us forward. As we reached the ship's hull, our engineer, Vasquez, ran a scanner along the metal. "This alloy doesn't match any known fabrication models," he muttered. "Some parts are organic? No, that can't be right." A deep unease settled in my stomach. The ship was old, far older than it should have been. Yet something about it felt preserved, like it had been waiting for us. When we forced open the airlock, the stench of something long dead hit us immediately. But there was another scent beneath it, something metallic, sharp, and wrong. Inside, the darkness swallowed our lights. The walls pulsed faintly, like veins beneath flesh. And then we heard it. A whisper, so soft I could have sworn it was inside my own head. "Welcome back." The doors slammed shut behind us. The moment the doors slammed shut, the temperature inside Ophion plummeted. Frost formed instantly on the edges of our visors, and our suit displays flickered with warnings, anomalous energy spikes, air pressure fluctuations, electromagnetic distortions. It was as if the ship itself had noticed us. I heard Vasquez curse behind me as he tapped at his helmet, trying to stabilize his readings. "What the hell was that? That voice, did anyone else hear that?" No one answered, but I knew we all had. It hadn't come through our comms, it had been inside our heads. A voice so familiar yet utterly alien. We moved forward cautiously, sweeping the entry corridor with our rifle-mounted lights. The walls were lined with what should have been standard bulkheads, but the metal, if it was metal, was wrong. It had a slick, almost wet sheen, as though the ship had been sweating in the cold. And then I saw them. The markings. Etched into the walls, spiraling out in delicate, interwoven patterns that I knew, instinctively, were not human-made. Not just writing, something deeper, something primal, alive. It almost seemed to shift when I looked at it too long, rearranging itself, whispering meanings that never fully formed. Vasquez and I stopped to examine them. "This isn't any known language," he muttered. "But it reminds me of something." He trailed off, touching the surface. His fingers left a smear. The walls weren't just damp. They were bleeding. A shudder ran through the ship, a deep groaning sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the lights came on. Not the harsh, artificial glow of normal emergency systems. No, this was something else. Pulsing, organic, watching. Dim red veins ran along the floor, casting shadows that moved when we didn't. The air thickened, becoming almost gelatinous with an unseen pressure. Our medic, Kane, took a sharp breath. "We need to get out of here." He was right. Every part of me knew he was right. But something deeper, a sick, gnawing curiosity, kept me rooted to the spot. I turned toward what should have been the bridge, following the path the lights seemed to want us to take. We passed through corridors that felt too narrow, too twisted. The layout of the ship shifted, subtly, each time I looked back. As if we were no longer inside a vessel, but a vast, living labyrinth that had no true walls, no real end. Then we found the first body. It wasn't human. It had been human, once. The shape was still there, a skull, limbs, the tattered remnants of a suit similar to ours. But the flesh had fused into the ship itself, stretched and woven like veins into the walls. Its mouth hung open in a silent, eternal scream, its fingers half formed into tendrils of the surrounding material. The whisper came again. "Welcome back." Vasquez stumbled back, gasping. No, this doesn't make sense. This ship crashed. That means it was, what? Here for centuries? But this body. Still fresh, I finished. Then the body's eyes snapped open. We fired instinctively, our rifle shots flashing in the crimson half-light. But by the time the afterimage faded from my visor, the body was gone. Not torn apart. Not disintegrated. Just gone. That was when we heard the footsteps. A steady, rhythmic tapping, echoing from deeper within the ship. Slow, deliberate. We were not alone. And we had just woken something up. The footsteps grew louder. Not hurried, not searching, certain. As if whatever was coming already knew exactly where we were. "Move!" I hissed, pushing Vasquez forward as we backed away from the corridor. Kane was breathing fast, his hands shaking on his rifle. None of us knew what we were up against, but our instincts screamed run. We stumbled through the dim, pulsing corridors, the ship itself shifting around us like a maze rearranging its own pathways. The walls twisted, bulkheads seemed to breathe, shifting from metal to something too much like flesh. Every door we reached led to another passageway, looping us deeper inside. Then the lights flickered, and for just a second, in the stuttering half-darkness, I saw it. A silhouette, too tall, too thin, its limbs elongated beyond reason. It didn't move like something that walked. It glided, its joints bending wrong, as if it had learned movement rather than been born to it. And where its face should have been. No. Not a face. A void. A spiraling, hungry emptiness where a head should be. And then the lights came back, and it was gone. Vasquez was whispering to himself, his voice trembling. I swear to God. It's watching us, Kane murmured. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the walls. And that's when I realized, so were the faces. Thousands of them. Not corpses. Not markings. Eyes. Faces stretching out from the organic surface of the ship, mouths moving silently, their expressions pleading. Twisted, half-formed shapes caught in an endless state of suffering, fused into the walls themselves. I recognized one of them. Captain Reese. The commander of a long-lost expedition, one I'd read about as a cadet. His ship had vanished almost a century ago. He was staring at me now, his lips moving in voiceless agony. Vasquez grabbed my arm. This ship isn't just alive, it's feeding. The whisper came again. Welcome back. And this time, it came from inside my own head. The ship was remembering me. I turned to Kane, but he wasn't moving anymore. His rifle slipped from his hands. His body twitched. Then he started screaming. It was the worst sound I'd ever heard. Not just pain. Despair. His skin blackened, rippling like something underneath was trying to push out. His bones cracked, his jaw unhinging, his body twisting. I tried to grab him, to pull him away, but his eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw understanding. Not fear. Acceptance. He knew what was happening. And then the walls swallowed him. 1 second he was there, writhing in agony. The next gone. Absorbed. Another silent face in the mass of shifting, suffering flesh. We ran. Vasquez and I didn't look back. We sprinted through the twisting corridors, past impossible passageways that shouldn't have been there, down halls that had changed since the last time we'd seen them. The ship was playing with us. No, it was learning from us. Every turn, every desperate breath, every beat of our terror-fed hearts. It was tasting us. Then we found it. The bridge. Or what was left of it. The consoles were dead, shattered, their screens cracked and blackened. But in the center, surrounded by what looked like the twisted remains of its former crew, was something else. A throne. Not built. Grown. A spire of bone and glistening black sinew, pulsating with the ship's unnatural rhythm. And sitting upon it, its elongated limbs draped over the armrests like a mockery of royalty, was the thing that had been following us. Not a captain. Not a survivor. The conductor of this unholy symphony. It stood as we entered, its hollow, spiraling void of a face turning toward me. And in the voice that had haunted us since the moment we set foot on this cursed wreck, it whispered, "Welcome home." I don't remember running. I don't remember how Vasquez and I escaped the bridge, how we tore through the ship's shifting corridors, how we fought against the very walls closing in around us. All I remember is the sound. A resonance deep in my skull, vibrating through my bones, making my vision blur and my thoughts fracture. Not speech, not words, something older, something that existed before language. A sound that had no beginning and no end. The ship was singing to us. And we were losing ourselves to it. Vasquez was ahead of me, sprinting toward the airlock. His breathing was ragged, panicked, but he was still alive. That was all that mattered. Then he stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because the ship made him stop. His legs locked, his arms stiffened at his sides. He turned slowly, his eyes vacant, his lips trembling with words he hadn't chosen to speak. "It's inside me." His voice wasn't his anymore. "It knows who I am." I reached for him. I tried to pull him away. But he only smiled, a weak, resigned smile. "Run." Then he turned and walked back into the ship. I watched as the walls opened for him, embracing him, welcoming him home. He belonged to it now. And I ran. The next thing I knew, I was outside, stumbling through the storm of Korthos-9, my suit flashing with pressure warnings, my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached the dropship. The pilot was yelling at me, asking where the others were, asking what the hell had happened. I couldn't answer. I just screamed at him to take off. As we lifted off, I saw it. The Ophion. No longer just a wreck. No longer a derelict. It was alive, awake, its pulsing lights watching me as I fled. It had let me go. Not because I had escaped. Because it wanted me to leave. Because it knew I would bring others. I would tell the story. And sooner or later, someone else would come looking for the Phantom Wreck of Korthos-9. And the ship would be waiting. Waiting to welcome them home.